Hi! Today, we will tell you the story of a movie titled Ready or Not, which was released in 2019. Okay, let's get right to the story. The Ladomas family has an unusual tradition for welcoming new members into the family. On the night of the wedding, the new bride or groom is invited to play games with the other family members. One of the games in their ritual is hide and seek, where the bride or groom must hide, and the others must find them. However, unexpectedly, each family member is allowed to bring a weapon, turning the game into a hunting expedition. 30 years later, Grace was preparing to become part of the Ladomas family, a renowned family that had amassed their wealth by manufacturing various games. Before walking down the aisle, she practiced her wedding vows in front of the mirror alone, jokingly admitting she couldn't wait to become part of her husband's chaotic family. Just then, Alex, the groom, entered to check on Grace. Grace admitted she was a bit nervous as some of Alex's family members seemed to dislike her. However, Alex asked Grace not to worry too much, explaining that Alex's family might not be used to the speed of their relationship, as most of his family members had dated for 3 years before getting married, while Alex and Grace had only been dating for 18 months. Alex's brother, Daniel, then entered. He was asked to pick up Alex, and he didn't forget to tease his nervous younger brother who was about to get married. With a straight expression, Daniel also reminded Grace that if she still wanted to back out, there was still time. Grace thought he was joking. Daniel then told them to hurry down. After Daniel left, Alex said that Daniel was right, and even suggested that Grace elope if she wanted to. But of course, Grace insisted, and didn't change her mind. A few minutes later, Grace was ready to walk down the aisle set up by the pool. They took photos first, and Daniel's aunt looked at Grace with a sneer, making her even more nervous. Daniel told her to relax, explaining that his aunt was just trying to gauge whether his cousin's future wife was materialistic, just like she had done with Daniel's wife in the past. On the other hand, Alex's mother, Becky, approached Grace and comforted her with her own story of marrying Alex's father. She understood what it was like to marry into a wealthy family while coming from an ordinary background. She advised Grace not to feel discouraged and to focus on Alex. In short, their wedding ceremony went smoothly, and that night, they were getting ready for their first night together. But suddenly, Aunt Helene appeared in their room, startling Grace. Without expression, Helene announced that all the family members were waiting for them in the music room, and Alex said they would be right there. He explained that his aunt had entered through a special servant's door that Grace hadn't expected to be in every room. Here, Alex finally revealed to Grace that she had to participate in a family initiation game, a long-standing tradition. They didn't know what game they would play because it was determined by a random card. Alex said they might end up playing boring games, but that was the rule. Furthermore, Alex mentioned that the tradition might exist because they had prospered from the games. Grace asked if she had to win, and Alex replied that she didn't have to win. The important thing was to participate. By playing just once, Grace would officially become a new member of the Ladomas family. Grace then asked Alex for some time to get ready before going downstairs. Meanwhile, Alex went downstairs and started chatting with his father, Tony. His father said that Mr. LaBelle would definitely be there to watch their game. He finally asked what Alex had told Grace, but Alex admitted he would never tell her the truth. Shortly after, Grace arrived at the Ladomas' grand music room, complete with a pianist and several black-clad servants carrying champagne. Daniel and his wife, Charity, were already waiting. Becky greeted Grace and praised the beauty of her wedding. Here, Grace said she had always wanted a complete family. She was raised in an orphanage and only lived briefly with her foster parents. After meeting Alex, she was grateful to finally have a real, permanent family. Becky also admitted that she was grateful to have a daughter-in-law like Grace. Alex arrived and interrupted their conversation. Grace noticed that Alex seemed a little restless, perhaps not wanting to play that night, but Alex admitted that he was feeling a little unwell but couldn't cancel. Shortly after, Alex's other siblings, Emily and her husband Fitch, along with their child Georgie, arrived. They both greeted Grace very warmly. Emily appeared to have an exaggerated expression, which was due to her habit of using illegal drugs. Grace immediately noticed this from their first meeting because there was a trace of white powder on Emily's nose. Once everyone was present, Tony took them all to another room, a special family recreation room.
My foster parents were great.
The walls of this room were filled with weapons, both manual and hunting rifles. Grace was stunned as she looked at the painting of Ladomas' great-grandfather, who seemed to have enjoyed hunting. She joined the other family members sitting around a long table.
With us today.
Tony began the game with a brief history of the Ladoma family, where Tony's great-grandfather built a printing shop and made playing cards during the Civil War. Later, Tony's grandfather expanded their business to sports equipment and game boards. Since then, the Ladomas family had achieved extraordinary material success. However, their wealth originated from a philanthropist and collector of exotic and antique items named LeBale, whom Tony's grandfather met on a ship. LeBale and his grandfather discovered they shared a passion for playing cards. One day, LeBale showed him an antique box with a special key. They made a bet. If Tony's grandfather could open the box, LeBale would fund any business Tony's grandfather desired. After spending hours trying, Tony's grandfather finally solved the mystery of the box. From that day on, a ritual began to welcome new family members. The Ladomas family put a blank card in the box, and the new daughter-in-law would take a card from inside, and LeBale's box would tell them what game they would play. After recounting the story, Tony invited Grace to take a card. Grace laughed when she saw the game written on the card, which was hide and seek. However, the expressions on everyone's faces grew tense upon hearing the game. Naively, Grace thought it was an easy game. Alex whispered in her ear to wait in the room, but Grace wanted to play. Tony explained the simple rules. Grace could hide anywhere, and after that, he and the other family members would count to 100 before searching for her. Before starting, Grace made sure that they would not cheat and find her easily through the CCTV cameras. Tony assured her that they would turn off the cameras during the game. Tony wished her luck and let Grace go. The game officially began when the waiter played the song Hide and Seek as background music. Grace rushed upstairs to find a hiding place.
We place a blank playing.
Meanwhile, Tony hands out weapons to each family member except Alex. Becky suggests Alex stay in the game room and not watch the bride being hunted. Becky also tells Charity to keep an eye on Alex. However, Alex refuses to stay put. He leaves the game room and heads to his room through the underground corridor. When Charity enters and tries to cheer him up, she is startled to find the room empty. On the other side, Fitch walks alongside Becky, asking how long the game usually lasts. However, Becky answers that there is no set time. She says the hide-and-seek game has only been played once since she joined Ladomas. On the upper floor, Grace, who is still unaware of the consequences of the game, smiles happily as she hides in the food elevator. She waited for a long time before finally deciding it was time to come out. She took off her shoes and crept out. Just then, Ladoma's maid, Clara, who had been reading a bedtime story, woke up. She was startled to find Georgie's bed empty and hurriedly got up, calling out for Georgie. Hearing the maid's voice, Grace immediately ran to find a hiding place. Suddenly, Alex covered Grace's mouth from behind, startling her half to death. Alex immediately told her to stay quiet and hide with him beside the bed. Shortly after, Clara entered the room and suspected Georgie was there. They waited until Clara left, but Grace was shocked to hear gunshots near them. She peeked out and saw Clara lying on the floor, critically wounded. Grace tried not to make a sound, especially after Emily screamed in excitement, thinking she had hit her target. However, Emily's reaction changed immediately when she realized it wasn't Grace.
Alex, this way!
Grace was even more shocked to discover she was the target, especially when Tony, Becky, and the others arrived to witness Emily's mistake. After that, Helene and Daniel helped move Clara to another location.
Just as soon.
In a state of shock, Grace asked Alex for an explanation of what had just happened. Alex replied that Grace had drawn the bad card. They hurriedly left the room and headed toward the secret corridor. Here, Alex explained slowly that the hide-and-seek game meant they had to kill Grace before dawn. Otherwise, they believed they would face misfortune. Alex admitted he had to pretend to play along so he could get Grace out of the house. Grace was now terrified because her life was in danger. She blamed Alex for not telling her about the game beforehand. Alex insisted that he hadn't expected to get that game, especially since the Ladomas family hadn't played it in a long time. He persuaded Grace to continue the game, or else both of them would die. Grace is terrified and doesn't want to leave without Alex, but Alex tells her to go while he helps her unlock the door. Unbeknownst to them, Fitch is in the bathroom on the floor below. Overhearing the argument but not taking it seriously, he returns to watching a video tutorial on how to use an arrow. As a result, Grace followed Alex's instructions to escape through the kitchen door. He had already told her which door led to the kitchen, but when she reached the end of the hallway, Grace was torn between two doors on either side. She chose one. Unfortunately, it was the wrong choice. When she emerged outside, Helene, Daniel, and Tony were carrying Clara's body to another location. They all froze and stared in shock at Grace. Tony released Clara's body and prepared to shoot. From the opposite side, Emily arrived and fired a shot, but once again, she missed, making Tony furious. Grace rushed to another room and tried to escape through the window, but unfortunately, it was locked.
Was with us today.
Grace was about to break the window with a chair, but changed her mind when she heard footsteps. She leaned against the wall and watched the door next to her, but Daniel entered from the other side. Grace froze, thinking Daniel was going to finish her off. But Daniel, seeing her, said he just wanted a drink. He said the rules required him to call someone else, but Grace tried to persuade him to help her. Daniel said he would count to 10, and Grace had to leave before he called the others. Charity arrived first and was disappointed to find out Daniel had let her escape. Charity knew Daniel didn't care about their family ritual, but she hoped he could pretend to participate. Daniel then reminded Charity about how he had told her about this game before they got married. Charity herself came from an unpleasant family background and was willing to do anything to avoid going back there.
Is with us today.
Soon after, Tony arrived, also disappointed that Grace hadn't been found yet, especially since Charity had apologized for Alex escaping her watch. All the members finally gathered in the room, with Emily once again blamed for her mistake in shooting Clara. Now she had left her gun somewhere, and her husband said she could use his bow instead. Just as the arrow was being passed, Emily accidentally pressed the bow's trigger, hitting the servant who had suddenly entered the room. As a result, she became even more frustrated because everything she did always failed, so Aunt Helene ended the life of the dying servant. Feeling stuck, Becky suggested that they use the surveillance camera, but Helene thought that was disrespectful to tradition. Tony defended Becky, saying they should keep up with the times. When the game was first played, Tony's grandfather didn't have a surveillance camera, but he was sure his grandfather would have used one if they had been invented back then. In the end, they agreed to break the tradition and search for Grace using the surveillance cameras. Becky told Tony and Daniel to go to the monitoring room, while the others split up to search for Alex. Meanwhile, Grace entered the weapons room to take a hunting rifle and bullets, then went to the kitchen, which was empty at the time. She thought Alex had unlocked the door, but it was still locked. Grace planned to shoot the lock, but the rifle didn't work. Just then, the male head butler entered the kitchen, and Grace quickly ducked under the kitchen table. Alex was in the surveillance room but hadn't figured out how the system worked, so Grace stayed in the kitchen and tried to reload the rifle silently. On the other side, Daniel noticed that the surveillance camera light was on and immediately realized that Alex was in the monitoring room. At the same time, the security system was successfully disabled by Alex. Grace stood up and threatened the head butler to let her go. The head butler said, "The ammunition is just for show." Without losing her wits, Grace hits the man on the head with a still boiling teapot, then flees to another room. After that, she returns to the hallway where she had been hiding during hide and seek. Just as she was about to enter the food elevator, she saw a maid named Dora hiding in fear because her friends had been killed. However, the maid couldn't be trusted. She screamed to alert the Ladomas family. Dora accidentally pressed the elevator button and didn't realize it in time, resulting in her body being crushed between the elevator doors.
Just as soon.
The head waitress then reported the incident to Tony and the Ladomas family members who were gathered there. Tony was frustrated because he kept being outsmarted by a woman he thought was weak, especially since he knew Alex had helped her escape all this time. Helene asked him to control himself. She was sure they would get Grace eventually. In her opinion, Alex still couldn't accept his role in the Ladomas family. She herself still remembered the pain of being told that the person she loved had to die. They had to make Alex realize that he now had to lead the family. Unexpectedly, Grace overheard their conversation from outside the window without anyone noticing. After the conversation ended, Grace recklessly jumped from the second floor. She hesitated because she wanted to save Alex but decided to keep running. Outside, she saw someone with a flashlight. Grace hurriedly looked for a hiding spot and found an animal pen. She didn't expect that person to be Georgie, Alex's nephew. Grace thought Georgie was safe, but the boy was holding a gun and shot Grace's hand, causing her to scream in pain and shock. She immediately struck Georgie, knocking him to the ground, then fell into a pit filled with human skeletons and goat carcasses. Startled, Grace began climbing a small, rickety staircase at the edge of the staircase. It collapsed, leaving Grace clinging to the edge with one hand. As her hand was about to slip completely, her other hand instinctively grabbed the other side, which was unfortunately nailed down. Grace screamed in pain as her shot hand was wounded twice as badly, but she had to get up and continue her escape. Charity saw Grace in the distance and tried to shoot her, but missed. Charity then told the head servant the direction Grace had gone and approached the others. Meanwhile, Grace forced her body through the gaps in the fence while screaming for help. She managed to escape despite her body being severely scratched, But unfortunately, the passing car refused to help Grace, leaving her extremely frustrated. Shortly after, the head servant drove up in a car, searching the forest edges with a flashlight. He reported to Tony that he was certain Grace hadn't gone far and had entered the forest. Upon seeing the head servant's car, Grace quickly hid behind a large tree. Upon hearing the latest news, Tony grew even more anxious. On the other hand, Daniel didn't hide his indifference and invited them to share the wedding gifts the next morning. Daniel's attitude made Tony furious because he thought the game wasn't serious. He reminded them they had to find Grace before dawn or they would die. Tony was terrified of Mr. LaBelle, who didn't hesitate to punish families who failed to meet their targets. Becky asked her husband to calm down, then told Emily and Daniel to throw the servant's body into the goat pen. She told Emily to be careful this time so that there would be no more victims. Emily and Daniel obeyed their mother's orders. Emily asked Daniel what he remembered about playing hide-and-seek with Alex when they were little. He admitted that he tried to protect Alex and look after him.
He was with us today.
Nevertheless, Daniel felt he hadn't done enough to protect Alex, saying they all deserved to die. However, Emily insisted her children didn't deserve to die. Not far away, Georgie called his mother, telling Emily and Daniel he had shot Grace earlier. He claimed he was just following the example of those who had targeted him, but Emily was proud of her son's actions. Meanwhile, Grace sneaks toward another direction to avoid the head butler. She almost fails because the head butler catches up to her and attacks her. But Grace fights back and chokes the man until he loses consciousness.
Protect him. I don't know what he saw.
Grace thought the man had stopped breathing, but he hadn't. Shortly after Grace left the scene, she tried to call for help through the TripSafe channel in the car. A TripSafe representative named Justin tried to assist Grace, who needed police help. Unfortunately, Justin's computer indicated that the car Grace was driving had been reported stolen, so he remotely shut down the car following protocol. As if her misfortune wasn't enough, the head butler suddenly appeared and shattered the window, shooting Grace with a tranquilizer gun just before she could escape. In her hallucination, Grace thought Alex had saved her, but when she came to, she found herself back at the Le Domas family home. The butler shouted with joy as he reported his success in bringing Grace back. He was so happy that he turned on the music loudly, not realizing that Grace had regained consciousness and was attacking him from behind. The car suddenly swerved and overturned, crashing into a tree. However, Grace survived.
Tony.
She crawled out of the car and saw Daniel welcoming her. Grace had given up and begged Daniel to free her. She believed Daniel was good and wouldn't kill her. Grace tried to persuade Daniel, but it didn't work. Daniel hit her until she fainted. He knew Tony had followed him into the forest, so he told Tony to come out from behind the tree and help him carry Grace home. Meanwhile, Alex, who was handcuffed to the side of the bed, tried to free himself. Becky approached and tried to talk to Alex. Becky said they had already captured Grace. Alex says he won't let them hurt Grace. Becky admits she likes Grace too, but must continue the tradition to protect their family. Alex threatens his mother that he'll kill her if she hurts Grace. Becky just laughs. She believes Alex is actually on the Le Domas family's side. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let Grace draw a card from the start. Becky then asked why Alex was helping Grace. Alex replied that he realized what his family was doing was considered normal because they had made him think that way. Until he met Grace, who was completely different from them all. Alex said that if he had to choose between Grace and his mother, he would still choose Grace. Becky didn't believe him. She knew Alex and Grace had only been together for 1.5 years, so she felt she knew Alex better. After the conversation, Becky approached her 2 grandchildren, Emily's children, to introduce them to Mr. LaBelle. Becky said that LaBelle was their family's special friend, the one who had made it possible for their family to have so much wealth. However, Becky continued, LaBelle wanted something in return, and they all prepared themselves to complete the final ritual and put on their robes. Shortly after, Grace woke up bound to a table, her mouth taped shut. All the Le Domas family members were standing around the table, except Alex. Tony began the ritual by reciting a demon-summoning incantation and taking turns drinking from a cup. When the spell was finished and the knife was ready to be wielded, Tony suddenly felt sick and vomited, followed by the other family members, except Daniel. Helene realized that Daniel had poisoned the drink. Daniel immediately confessed that he had poured in the poison that the servants usually used, hydrochloric acid. Daniel hurried to free Grace, confessing to her that the poison was just a common toxin he found on Google, not a dangerous one. He helped Grace because he knew someone had to stop their family's ritual someday. Before Daniel could take Grace away, Charity arrived and pointed a gun at them. Daniel tried to persuade Charity, but she ignored him and fired a shot, hitting Daniel in the neck, causing him to lose a lot of blood. Grace grabbed Charity's gun, then hit her until she fainted and rushed to escape, but Tony stopped her. He was ready to kill Grace right there. But his weakened state allowed Grace to strike Tony with a lit lantern. The obstacles didn't stop there. Becky was waiting in the next room and was about to kill Grace with her bare hands. Undeterred, Grace fought back and managed to take Becky's life. Alex witnessed Grace killing her mother, and Grace apologized for what she had done. On the other hand, she gave news that Daniel did not survive. Alex approached Grace and touched her face.
Was with us today.
Grace initially trusted Alex, but Alex held Grace's head until it hurt, then called the other members of his family. It was almost dawn when they all lifted Grace onto the table and continued their ritual of sacrifice. This time, Alex led the ritual and held the dagger, but Grace managed to dodge and injure Helene's hand. Suddenly, everyone's attention was diverted. Grace got up from the table, then grabbed the knife from Alex's hand. Helene opened the window curtain and screamed in panic upon seeing the bright sunlight outside. They all closed their eyes and prepared to face the consequences of failing to complete the game. Helene insisted she wouldn't disappoint Mr. LaBelle, grabbing an axe to attack Grace. Just then, Helene's body suddenly exploded, and no one expected this to actually happen. The song Hide and Seek started playing again on its own. Charity tried to persuade Mr. LaBelle not to punish her, while Emily and her 2 children hurriedly ran away. Tony insisted he had done the right thing, but of course, what they had done was useless. Grace laughed triumphantly as she watched them receive their punishment. Alex tried to persuade Grace to take him back, but Grace no longer trusted him and said she wanted a divorce. Before Alex could respond, he exploded like the others. Now, with the flames from the lantern spreading in all directions, Grace saw Mr. LaBelle, the devil, sitting in the chair prepared for him. He nodded at Grace before disappearing, while Grace sat on the stairs as the firefighters arrived.